On that fateful March morning in 1944, the folder marked Geheim, nur für den Minister lay unopened on Albert Speer's mahogany desk in the Reich Ministry of Armaments and War Production. The document would forever shatter the last illusions harbored by the Third Reich's leadership. Through his office windows, Speer could observe the bomb-damaged streets of Berlin, where workers tirelessly cleared rubble from the latest Allied raid. The irony was not lost on him. Despite his remarkable achievements in increasing German production, the folder contained intelligence that would fundamentally alter Nazi Germany's understanding of its position in the global conflict. The awakening had begun gradually, like the slow recognition of an approaching storm. Albert Speer had been hailed as the miracle worker of German war production since taking control of armaments manufacturing on February 8, 1942, following Fritz Todd's mysterious death in a plane crash. At 39, he was the youngest minister in the Reich, an architect-turned-armaments wizard who had seemingly defied economic laws. His revolutionary reforms had introduced single-shift specialized production, standardized components, and reduced aircraft types from 42 to just 5 main models. By wresting control from competing Nazi fiefdoms and implementing mass production techniques learned from studying American automotive methods in the 1920s, he had increased German war production by 300% despite relentless Allied bombing. Hitler had called him the genius of organization, while Goebbels praised him as the man who made the impossible possible. By late 1943, Speer had legitimate reasons for confidence. German ammunition production had increased fivefold, tank production had quadrupled, and aircraft production had tripled. His dispersed production system kept weapons flowing to the Wehrmacht even as the combined bomber offensive reduced German cities to rubble. He had proven that rational organization could overcome material disadvantages, or so he believed until the intelligence reports began arriving in early 1944. The numbers seemed impossible, the claims absurd. According to German propaganda, America was merely a nation of jazz musicians and Hollywood actors, weakened by racial mixing and democratic inefficiency. How could such a nation produce weapons in quantities that dwarfed the combined output of the German Reich? The revelation began in January 1944 when Luftwaffe intelligence intercepted and decoded American production reports meant for Soviet allies through Lend-Lease shipments. General Adolf Galland, Inspector General of Fighter Forces, would later share these findings with Speer at a series of increasingly sobering meetings throughout 1944. The intercepted reports claimed that Americans had produced 9,113 aircraft in December 1943 alone, nearly matching Germany's entire quarterly production in a single month. Speer initially dismissed these figures as propaganda designed to demoralize German intelligence, but supporting evidence arrived from multiple independent sources. Reconnaissance photographs from neutral Swedish businessmen showed endless rows of B-24 Liberators at Willow Run, Michigan. A Swedish engineer who had toured the facility before America entered the war provided detailed observations that defied comprehension. The factory stretched 2/3 of a mile long and 1/4 mile wide, the report stated with clinical precision. By April 1944, they achieved production of one completed 4-engine bomber every 63 minutes, operating 2 9-hour shifts 6 days a week. Simple arithmetic revealed nearly 650 bombers monthly from this single facility. Speer studied the photographs with a magnifying glass, examining not just completed aircraft, but the revolutionary assembly process itself. The images revealed a production line where planes moved through fixed stations rather than workers moving to stationary aircraft. Henry Ford's automotive revolution applied to aviation manufacturing. With the Abwehr being absorbed into the SS in February 1944, Speer relied increasingly on alternative intelligence sources. Swiss businessmen maintaining commercial relationships with American companies provided production statistics from annual reports. Spanish diplomats in Washington forwarded American newspapers that brazenly published production figures. Portuguese merchants reported on American shipping observed in Atlantic ports. The most valuable intelligence came from Japanese naval attachés in Berlin, who throughout 1944 shared information gathered from their embassies in Argentina and Chile, revealing that American aircraft were arriving in massive quantities at South American training bases, 500 aircraft per month to Brazil alone, purely for training purposes. Swedish intelligence proved particularly detailed and disturbing. Sweden's ball-bearing giant SKF had factories in America and provided neutral Swedish executives with tours of American plants. These executives, maintaining Sweden's precarious neutrality, shared information with both sides. One report described the Pratt & Whitney engine plant in East Hartford, Connecticut. With production of 1,000 engines weekly, testing facilities running continuously, employing 40,000 workers including 11,000 women, with parking lots containing approximately 15,000 automobiles, workers' personal vehicles that spoke to a prosperity unimaginable in wartime Germany. In his office that March morning, Speer spread the intelligence reports across his conference table while his deputy for fighter production, Karl Sauer, stood beside him with calculator in hand, desperately verifying the figures. "Let us assume these numbers are exaggerated by 50% for propaganda purposes," Speer suggested with fading hope. "Even then," Sauer replied grimly, "they would be producing 48,000 aircraft annually, still more than our total production." But the evidence suggested no exaggeration whatsoever. American newspapers obtained through neutral embassies openly published production statistics without censorship. The New York Times reported Boeing's B-29 program in detail. Time magazine featured articles about Willow Run with specific production numbers. Life magazine published photographs of assembly lines with visible serial numbers that German intelligence could meticulously track. The revelation was profound and deeply disturbing to German sensibilities. In Germany, production figures were state secrets, workers signed death oaths, and factory locations were hidden. America published their production statistics in magazines sold at newsstands, treating as public information what Germany considered vital state secrets. The intelligence file on Willow Run became central to understanding American industrial capacity. Built by Ford Motor Company in 1941, the facility represented everything German production was not. The main building covered 3.5 million square feet, larger than the entire Messerschmitt complex at Augsburg. Swedish engineer Per Jakobsen, who had toured Willow Run in late 1943, provided a devastating report. The facility employed 42,000 workers, including 35% women, with workers remaining stationary while aircraft moved past them on automated conveyor systems. Training time for new workers averaged just 3 weeks, and by April 1944, production reached 453 aircraft in 468 hours, one of 24 every 63 minutes. Speer compared these figures to German aircraft production with growing despair. The Messerschmitt Bf-109, Germany's primary fighter, required 4,000 man-hours to produce by skilled craftsmen who assembled entire sections after 6 months of training. At Willow Run, each B-24 required approximately 1,225 man-hours in final assembly. Despite being a 4-engine bomber 5 times the weight of a Bf-109, it required less than one-third the labor through revolutionary production methods that turned aircraft manufacturing into an industrial process rather than a craft. Throughout 1944, Speer attended regular conferences with Hitler at various headquarters, each time presenting American production intelligence, and each time receiving the same response: denial and accusations of defeatism. At a May conference, Speer presented photographic evidence from Willow Run and production statistics from neutral sources. Hitler studied the materials briefly before dismissing them entirely. "Propaganda," he declared with characteristic certainty. "The Americans wish us to believe these fantasies. No nation can produce aircraft like automobiles." "But that is precisely what they are doing," Speer argued desperately. "They have applied automotive mass production to aircraft manufacturing." Hitler's response ended the discussion with finality. "These reports are Jewish lies spread by Roosevelt." But other members of the leadership were beginning to accept the unthinkable reality. Field Marshal Erhard Milch, State Secretary in the Aviation Ministry, privately acknowledged to Speer the truth they both feared to voice. "The numbers are correct, aren't they?" When Speer replied that he believed they were actually conservative, Milch's response was immediate and devastating. "Then we have already lost." Back in Berlin, Speer conducted a comprehensive analysis of comparative production that revealed the stark mathematical reality of Germany's position. according to intelligence that would later be confirmed by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey. German aircraft production peaked in July 1944 with 4,219 total aircraft, reaching its fighter peak in September with 3,375 units, for an annual total of 39,807 aircraft of all types, including 25,285 fighters, 5,468 bombers, and 9,054 other types. American aircraft production in 1944 averaged 8,000 monthly for an annual total of 96,000, including approximately 16,000 four-engine bombers, 35,000 fighters, and 45,000 trainers, transports, and other types. But raw numbers only told part of the devastating story. Each American B-24 Liberator possessed the striking power of 2 German medium bombers while requiring proportionally less fuel, crew, and maintenance per ton of bombs delivered. The qualitative gap magnified the already overwhelming quantitative disparity. By spring 1944, intelligence revealed another dimension of American superiority that defied German comprehension. Reports from Argentine sources detailed American aluminum production at 420,000 tons annually, compared to German aluminum production of only 245,000 tons despite controlling Norwegian hydroelectric resources. Oil statistics proved even more sobering and strategically decisive. American refineries produced 4.7 million barrels daily, while Germany, dependent on synthetic fuel from coal, produced the equivalent of merely 124,000 barrels daily. The Americans consumed more fuel in training flights than the entire Luftwaffe used in combat operations. Japanese military attachés in Berlin shared a particularly revealing observation that crystallized the fundamental nature of the conflict. Your submarines sink American tankers carrying 100,000 barrels of oil. They don't reduce consumption. They simply order another tanker. This is not war as we understand it. It is industrial arithmetic. Beyond production numbers, intelligence revealed technological innovations that German industry couldn't hope to match. At Wright Field in Ohio, Americans tested aircraft engines in altitude chambers simulating conditions at 50,000 feet, while Germany's highest altitude test facility reached only 30,000 feet. American factories employed statistical quality control, using random sampling and statistical analysis to replace individual inspection, dramatically increasing production speed while maintaining superior quality. The Norden bomb sight, analyzed from crashed B-17s, demonstrated precision engineering that exceeded German capabilities in mass production. Dr. Ernst Heinkel, the renowned aircraft designer, confided to associates the fundamental difference he observed: "We are artisans building aircraft. They are industrialists manufacturing them. We cannot compete with mathematics." Intelligence about American shipbuilding provided additional proof of this industrial superiority that transcended mere numbers. The United States built 2,710 Liberty ships between 1941 and 1945, and while the famous SS Robert E. Peary had been built in 4 days and 15 hours as a publicity stunt, regular production averaged 42 days from keel laying to launch. By 1943 and 1944, American shipyards were launching ships at a rate approaching 3 every 2 days during peak periods. German U-boat commanders operating in the Atlantic reported convoy after convoy of these vessels, making the strategic implications clear. America could replace losses faster than Germany could inflict them. This reality fundamentally altered the nature of the Battle of the Atlantic, transforming it from a war of attrition that Germany might win into a mathematical certainty of German defeat. In May 1944, intelligence about the Boeing B-29 Superfortress caused particular consternation among German leadership who still clung to hopes of technological superiority. Swedish businessmen reported visiting Boeing plants where these superbombers were in mass production with specifications that seemed impossible to achieve. The aircraft boasted a wingspan of 141 feet 3 inches, maximum weight of 140,000 pounds when loaded, bomb load of 20,000 pounds, range of 3,700 miles, pressurized cabin for high-altitude flight, and remote-controlled gun turrets. Production had begun in 1943, with 3,970 B-29s ultimately built across 4 facilities. Germany's most advanced bomber project, the Heinkel He 277, remained a paper design, while the B-29 was in mass production with hundreds already delivered to training units. When presented with photographic evidence of this achievement, Göring reportedly declared with characteristic denial, "Nobody can build such aircraft in quantity." But Galland and other realistic officers knew better. As Galland would write in his memoirs, this was not bluff. It was industrial reality that we could no longer ignore or explain away. Captured American airmen inadvertently provided intelligence confirming another devastating aspect of American superiority through their interrogations, which revealed the comprehensive nature of the gap in pilot training. American pilots received 250 to 400 hours of flight training before combat assignment, broken down into primary training 60 hours, basic training 70 hours, advanced training 50 to 75 hours, and transition training 75 to 170 hours. German fighter pilots in 1944 entered combat with an average of 112 hours, reduced from 160 hours earlier in the year, and by 1945, this would drop to just 50 hours as fuel shortages meant many never flew their assigned aircraft until their first combat mission. Technical Sergeant William Barnes, a B-17 crew chief captured after his bomber was shot down, provided particularly revealing information during interrogation that illustrated the abundance versus scarcity that defined the two war economies. "We were losing about 60 bombers a month over Germany," he explained matter-of-factly, "but Boeing alone was building 140 monthly. We had more bombers than trained crews." This casual revelation struck German interrogators with the force of a physical blow, representing a complete inversion of their own desperate circumstances. The D-Day invasion of June 1944 demonstrated American material superiority on an unprecedented scale that left German observers struggling to comprehend the logistics involved. Over 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 men in the first wave represented a concentration of force that dwarfed anything Germany could imagine assembling. Yet Hitler insisted this represented America's maximum effort, unsustainable beyond the initial assault. Speer knew better, as intelligence from Argentina continued reporting American shipyards launching new Essex-class aircraft carriers with systematic regularity. Each carrier required 27,000 tons of steel and carried 90 to 100 aircraft, while Germany's single aircraft carrier, the Graf Zeppelin, remained incomplete after 6 years of construction, a perfect metaphor for the industrial gap between the two nations. Dr. Karl Krach, chairman of IG Farben's supervisory board, reported through Swiss contacts that Americans produced 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually versus Germany's 120,000 tons, noting that they have solved the butadiene production problem that limited our output. They share technology. We guard secrets. They multiply efficiency through cooperation. July 1944 brought reconnaissance photographs of Detroit's industrial complex that showed concentration exceeding the entire Ruhr Valley. Willow Run covered 1,600 acres. Ford River Rouge sprawled across 2,000 acres. Chrysler Tank Arsenal occupied 1,100 acres, and General Motors facilities combined for over 5,000 acres. Photo interpreters identified hundreds of large factory buildings, thousands of vehicles in parking lots, dozens of power plants and rail yards handling over 1,000 freight cars daily, an industrial concentration that made Germany's most productive regions appear almost quaint by comparison. August 1944 marked both the peak of German aircraft production and Speer's complete acceptance of defeat's inevitability. A comprehensive intelligence summary presented the stark mathematical reality that could no longer be denied or rationalized away. American production from January to June 1944 included 48,000 aircraft on pace for 96,000 annually, approximately 14,000 tanks, over 300,000 military trucks, hundreds of naval vessels, and 5.75 million tons of merchant shipping. German production for the same period totaled 19,800 aircraft, 9,700 tanks and assault guns, 47,000 military trucks, 193 U-boats, and negligible merchant shipping. The trends were even more ominous than the absolute numbers, as American production was accelerating while German production, under strategic bombing, was beginning its terminal decline. The oil campaign had reduced fuel production catastrophically, and the transportation plan created bottlenecks that left finished weapons stranded at factories. By late 1944, fragmentary intelligence about a massive American project began reaching German intelligence services, and while the atomic nature remained secret, the industrial scale was evident and deeply disturbing. Reports described facilities consuming enormous amounts of electricity, with Oak Ridge, Tennessee alone using 1/7 of all U.S. electrical production, reaching peak demand of 298,800 kilowatts. The Americans were devoting resources equivalent to Germany's entire V-weapon program to a single project whose nature remained unknown but whose scale suggested capabilities beyond German imagination. This mystery project represented everything about American industrial capacity that German leadership failed to understand: the ability to pursue multiple massive endeavors simultaneously while maintaining overwhelming superiority in conventional production. September 1944 analysis revealed that the gulf between German and American production transcended mere numbers and represented a fundamental philosophical difference in approach to industrial warfare. American production emphasized simplification for mass production, interchangeability between manufacturers, statistical quality control, and worker specialization, while German production emphasized complex designs showcasing engineering excellence, unique parts for each manufacturer, individual craftsmanship, and workers as skilled generalists. As Speer would later reflect with bitter clarity, "We built aircraft as works of engineering art. They manufactured them as industrial products. Our Me-262 jet fighter was superior, but we could build only 20 monthly. They would have redesigned it for mass production and built 200. This fundamental difference in approach, art versus industry, craftsmanship versus manufacturing, determined the war's outcome more decisively than any battlefield engagement." By November 1944, even Göring could no longer maintain his denial of American production superiority. The Battle of Lake Gulf demonstrated American naval production capabilities that rendered comparisons almost meaningless. They deployed more aircraft carriers than Germany possessed destroyers. At a Luftwaffe conference, Galland presented statistics that painted a picture of hopeless disparity. American fighters outnumbered Luftwaffe fighters 15-1 over Germany. American pilots arrived with 400 flight hours while German pilots had 50, and American fighters had reliable engines lasting 400 hours between overhauls while German engines managed only 25 hours. "We faced not one Air Force but several," Galland explained to his increasingly demoralized staff. "The 8th Air Force alone has 3,000 heavy bombers. Each American Air Force is larger than our entire Luftwaffe." This revelation struck at the heart of German military thinking, which had always assumed rough parity in numbers with qualitative superiority providing the decisive edge. The reality of facing multiple enemy air forces, each individually superior in both numbers and quality, represented a strategic impossibility that no amount of courage or skill could overcome. December 1944's Battle of the Bulge provided the final irrefutable proof of American industrial superiority's strategic implications. Despite achieving complete tactical surprise and initial success, German forces were overwhelmed by the speed and scale of the American response. Within days, American forces moved 250,000 men, 50,000 vehicles, and 500,000 tons of supplies to contain the breakthrough, a logistical feat that demonstrated the industrial system's ability to translate production into battlefield capability. Captured American supply depots revealed abundance beyond German comprehension, with more supplies in a single depot than entire German divisions possessed. This abundance wasn't merely material but psychological, representing a fundamental difference in how the two nations approached warfare. Germany hoarded resources and planned for scarcity. America deployed resources with the confidence that industrial production could replace anything consumed or lost. January 1945 brought Speer's most comprehensive assessment of the production gap, compiled with the assistance of Swiss banking contacts who provided American war bond advertisements that openly stated production figures. "Your war bonds have built 300,317 aircraft from 1940 to 1945, 86,000 tanks, 2.6 million trucks, 6,500 naval vessels, and 2,710 Liberty ships," the advertisements proclaimed proudly. These numbers, published in magazines to encourage bond purchases, would have been state secrets punishable by death in Germany, yet America advertised them as symbols of national achievement. On January 30th, the anniversary of Hitler's rise to power, Speer attended what would be his last major conference, attempting to convince Hitler to seek terms before complete destruction became inevitable. Mein Führer, we must face reality, Speer pleaded with desperate urgency. The Americans produce in 1 month what we produce in a year. Hitler's response revealed his complete detachment from reality and sealed Germany's fate. Wars are won by will, not production statistics. On March 18, 1945, Speer submitted a memorandum to Hitler arguing that Germany's economy would collapse within 4 to 8 weeks. The following day, March 19th, Hitler issued his infamous Nero Decree, ordering the destruction of all German infrastructure to deny it to advancing Allied forces. Speer's response on March 29th argued against this destruction with logic that no longer penetrated Hitler's delusions. The enemy's superiority in armaments and industrial capacity has reached proportions that render further resistance meaningless. The Americans can replace in weeks what we destroy. We cannot rebuild in decades. Hitler accused him of treason and defeatism, but Speer had moved beyond caring about such accusations. The production statistics had convinced him that Germany's defeat had been certain since at least mid-1944. And continued resistance served only to increase the destruction of what remained of German civilization. As American forces approached Berlin in April 1945, intelligence continued arriving about American production capabilities, including a captured Fortune magazine that revealed the automobile industry's complete conversion to war production. The entire American automobile industry, which had produced 4.8 million vehicles in 1941, had converted to military production, manufacturing millions of military vehicles, thousands of aircraft, and tens of thousands of tanks without disrupting civilian transportation through expanded public transit and rationing systems that maintained social cohesion. As the Third Reich collapsed around them, the production statistics told an irrefutable story of industrial capacity that made German defeat not just inevitable but predetermined. Total U.S. war production included 300,317 military aircraft from 1940 to 1945, 86,000 tanks, 2.6 million military trucks, 639,000 jeeps, 257,000 artillery pieces, 2.6 million machine guns, 6,500 naval vessels, and 2,710 Liberty ships. German war production totaled 95,000 aircraft from 1939 to 1945, 63,800 tanks and self-propelled guns, 345,000 military trucks, 61,000 artillery pieces, 1.2 million machine guns, and 1,171 U-boats. The ratios were overwhelming: 3.2 to 1 in aircraft, 1.35 to 1 in tanks, despite Germany's longer production period, and 7.5 to 1 in trucks, and these figures excluded Lend-Lease production sent to Allies. After the war, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey confirmed that German intelligence had actually underestimated American production throughout the conflict. The survey noted that German intelligence estimates of U.S. aircraft production for 1944 predicted only 72,400 aircraft, while actual production was 96,318, an underestimation of 330% that demonstrated how thoroughly American industrial capacity exceeded even the most pessimistic German projections. While Speer's memoirs, Inside the Third Reich, focused primarily on his own achievements in relationship with Hitler, in post-war interrogations and interviews, he acknowledged the overwhelming nature of American industrial capacity with the clarity that wartime desperation had prevented. In a 1970s interview, he reflected with brutal honesty, "By early 1944, I knew with certainty that Germany would lose the war." American production of 96,000 aircraft in 1944 was not a surge, it was sustainable indefinitely. Other German leaders corroborated this recognition of industrial reality once the propaganda constraints of wartime had been removed. Field Marshal Erhard Milch testified, "When I learned America produced 9,000 aircraft in a single month, I knew the war was lost." Admiral Karl Donitz testified, when intelligence reported Americans building escort carriers faster than we could build submarines. I knew the Battle of the Atlantic was lost. General Adolph Galland wrote with characteristic directness, "Each American pilot we shot down was replaced by 2 more, better trained." We faced not an enemy, but an avalanche. American technological advantages multiplied their numerical superiority in ways that German planners had never anticipated. The proximity fuse increased anti-aircraft effectiveness by 700%, and America produced 22 million while Germany never developed the technology. American radar development proceeded on multiple tracks simultaneously, mass-producing thousands of units while German radar remained handcrafted in hundreds. The turbocharger gave American fighters decisive altitude advantage, with General Electric producing 300,000 during the war, while German attempts to copy captured units failed due to lack of metallurgy for mass production. The economic disparity made German victory impossible from any rational perspective. In 1944, America's gross national product was $210 billion versus Germany's $45 billion. America devoted 45% to war production while Germany committed 65%, yet American war production exceeded Germany's total GNP. As historians would later note, America could lose Germany's entire annual production in a single battle and continue fighting, affording waste that would have crippled the German economy entirely. America trained 435,000 pilots during the war versus Germany's 57,000, and by 1945, American pilots were engaging German pilots who had never fired their weapons in training due to ammunition shortages. Luftwaffe General Johannes Steinhoff testified with bitter clarity, "We sent children to fight professionals." It was not combat, but execution. The knowledge of American production superiority created a psychological crisis within German leadership that progressed through predictable stages: denial, rationalization, desperation, delusion, and finally acceptance. This progression affected military strategy, leading to increasingly desperate gambles that hastened defeat rather than postponing it. The greatest irony was that American production achieved what German ideology claimed impossible: racial integration and gender equality in industry proved more efficient than Aryan supremacy. American factories employed diverse workforces, voluntarily achieving greater productivity than German forced labor through superior organization and motivation. In his final years, Speer reflected on the fundamental lesson with the wisdom that comes only from complete defeat. We confused military prowess with industrial power. We believed racial ideology could overcome numerical reality. We thought will could defeat production. Every assumption proved false. When I learned they produced 96,000 aircraft in 1944, I knew not just that we would lose, but that we had already lost. The war continued for another year, but the outcome had already been determined. World War II was not won on the beaches of Normandy or in the ruins of Berlin. It was won in the factories of Detroit, the shipyards of California, and the aircraft plants of Seattle. It was won by workers who never saw combat, but whose industrial might made victory inevitable through the systematic application of democratic industrial organization. Germany challenged the world's greatest industrial power with ideology and courage, learning too late that in modern warfare, production is strategy, logistics is tactics, and industrial capacity is victory. The Americans understood this principle from the beginning, while Germans learned it only when learning could no longer change the outcome. Speer's recognition of American production superiority marked the moment when rational German leadership understood that the war's outcome was predetermined by industrial mathematics rather than military skill. The 96,000 aircraft produced in 1944 were not just machines but manifestations of an industrial system achieving unprecedented efficiency through democratic organization. Each B-24 rolling off Willow Run's assembly line every 63 minutes represented the systematic superiority of democratic industrial organization over totalitarian control. The production war proved that in modern industrial warfare, the factory floor is as decisive as the battlefield. And when Albert Speer saw that America produced 96,000 aircraft in 1944, he saw the future, a future where German defeat was mathematically certain regardless of battlefield heroics or tactical brilliance. The transformation of American industry from consumer goods to weapons of war represented the greatest concentration of industrial power in human history. And against this reality, the Third Reich never stood a chance. The story of Albert Speer's recognition of American production superiority is ultimately a testament to the decisive power of industrial democracy over totalitarian ambition. In 1944, the nation possessing that overwhelming industrial capacity was undeniably, overwhelmingly, and insurmountably the United States of America. And the 96,000 aircraft produced that year were not just symbols of American might. They were proof that totalitarian ambition would always fall before democratic industrial capacity when tested in the crucible of total war.